Radical reflection. Although our actions are important, we learn more about ourselves when we examine our motives. Radical self love inquiry is less about judging ourselves for what we do and far more about compassionately asking ourselves why. We know we are the island of determined buying. When we honest inquiries about why we made a purchase show us that our motivations were more closely connected to our beliefs that we are somehow deficient or unworthy. Determined buying leaves us feeling numbed, out of disconnected from our bodies and our world. A great way to distinguish determined buying from best interest buying is to ask yourself, do I truly know I am no less worthy without this purchase? Am I buying this because it is in addition to the fullness of my already divine existence? Or is this purchase an effort to fix some presumed flaw? And if I think I'm flawed, where is the message coming from? Who told me? Why do I believe them? Our answers to these simple questions, are a portal into a new way of being in a relationship with ourselves, our bodies, and our money. Of course, this is not new at all. It is just our return to radical self love. In Apologetic Inquiry number 15, best interest buying is also about reducing the harm our purchases cause other bodies. What are 3 ways you can reduce the harmful or exploitative outcomes of your purchase? A government for by and about bodies. For, by, and about bodies. We cannot talk about bodies without talking about the system that governs our bodies. If you are reading this book, you are probably located in some society with a government. That is, of course, unless you somehow found a copy of this book in a dark cave in a secret land where only you live, in which case ignore this section and consider yourself very lucky. The rest of us live under systems of government that are by their very nature about rules, laws, and bodies, allocations of resources, attribution of rights, and assignment of responsibilities in a society are all functions of government, and they impact the daily lives of governed, all of whom just happen to people with bodies. Our systems and structures do not exist in a vacuum. These systems in many ways mirror the societies that made them. They are created and upheld by humans who gave the same indoctrination beliefs and shames that we all have. Those who govern are not immune to the inheritance of body shame, either are recipient of perpetrators. Our leaders mold and uphold system of government that directly affect our experience of body shame and body-based oppression. Officials are in their lives, in the lives of their constituent, and in a society at large. The power to create laws also endows government with the power to influence which legally to verifying degrees and without very much though sorry the power to influence which body we accept as normal and which we do not. Although the validation of legally to varying degrees and without very much thought, many of us have accepted that we have been told about our bodies and the bodies of others based on what government allows, sanctions, ignores, and criminalize. As governments wield authority and oversee systems, they are in a unique position to shape how we validate and stratify different bodies. Ultimately, they are responsible for creating laws and entities that either protect bodies or oppress them. Unfortunately, the history of government using its vast influence to ensure that all bodies are treated equitably that has been about as consistent as a game of Russian roulette. Radical reflection. Systems of oppression stand or fall based on whether humans uphold or resist them. We, the people, have the power to uphold or resist body-based oppression. Did you know the following? 76 countries have laws criminalizing homosexuality. In at least 5 countries, the death penalty can be applied to those found to be gay. Immigrants can't be deported from New Zealand for having a BMI, body mass index, over 35. In Saudi Arabia, a fatwa, Islamic ruling, states that women should not drive because doing so could lead to the removal of the hijab, interaction with men, and taboo acts. The Asexualization Act of 1909 made it legal in California to forcibly sterilize anyone the state deemed mentally ill, mentally deficient, or possessing a feeble-mindedness. California was still forcibly sterilizing female prison inmates as recently as 2010. Most were inmates of color. In Malta, if a kidnapper, after abduction of a person, shall marry such person, we shall not be liable to prosecution. In Greece, a 2012 measure allows police to detain people suspected of being HIV positive and force them to be tested. The measure also urged landlords to evict tenants who are HIV positive to counter a perceived public health threat. Legislating body shame is not draconian practice of centuries bygone. The above laws are modern-day examples of how our government build body-based oppression into everyday lives, codifying inequality and injustice for all types of bodies, from LGBTQIA bodies to fat bodies to women's bodies. We live under systems that force us to judge, devalue, and discriminate against the bodies of others. Why? You might wonder. Have we been so committed to discriminating against various bodies? The answer is, to answer this question, we must look at the central currency of government power. The Center of American Women in Politics reports that 36 women have held a U.S. governorship since the first woman was elected as a governor in 1925. By contrast, the United States has had over 2,300 male governors in its history. Globally, women hold only 23% of the total available seats in the national parliament. Consider that women represent approximately half the human population, and it becomes glaringly clear that this parity in the manifestation of gender equality. Right now, your favorite uh, your favorite men's rights activist is yelling, "These feminists are so dumb." Duh. They are fewer men because women just don't get involved in politics as much as men do. My contemplative reply might be, I wonder how much the 144 years American women went without voting rights impacted that. Even today, in many countries, women must battle laws forbidding or obstructing their involvement in government. Even without the presence of such laws, women's involvement in the political landscape cannot be separated from the scrutiny, objectification, and sexism they still face while running for office. All of or all other all over the world, women must traverse hostile terrain that questions female suitability for political service while excusing gender discrimination by using outdated disparaging tropes about female intelligence, ability, and acumen as justifications for the bias. Now, Naomi Wolf, journalist and author of Beauty Myth, writes, "A culture fixed on female thinness is not an obsession about female beauty, but an obsession about female obedience. Dieting is the most potent political sedative in history. A quietly mad population is tractable one." Wolf strategically illustrate how body shame social messaging is used as a means of controlling and centralizing political power. We need look no further than 2016 US presidential election to see Wolf's thesis in action. Candidate Hillary Clinton was exhaustingly scrutinized about her aesthetic presentation. Outfits, makeup, hairstyle were all fodder for the 24-hour news cycle. Even the pro-Hillary 100,000 plus member Facebook group Pantsuit Nation chose her penchant for eschewing skirts and dresses as the name of their collective, inadvertently directing people focus to her physical appearance rather than her decade of political experience. At every corner, women's political access hangs on the society ability to see them in alignment with the default ideals of women first and then politicians. But political gatekeeping based on bodies exists beyond the realm of sex and gender binaries. In workshops, I often ask participants to consider the 36 women who have been governors throughout the country's history and to take guess at what those numbers might be if we were to break them down by various identities. How many people of color have been governors? What about the number of openly gay or lesbian people? How about people with disabilities or transgender folks? Undoubtedly, people began to see how those numbers winnow down to fewer and fewer diverse bodies being represented in our representative government, but we do not have to guess, the numbers speak for themselves. 24 governments have been people of color, 6 governments have been enabled, 2 governors have been openly gay or lesbian, 0 have been openly transgender. Remember, most of us live at the intersection of gender, age, race, disability, etc. Our identities overlapping, which means representation is nearly non existent for bodies living at the axis of multiple identities. The United States has had only one woman of color serve as governor and one lesbian woman. All the other intersections of identity, zero. This country is not an anomaly in its history of centralizing political power toward a very specific sort of body. Most nations have a default body in their government structure, although social and cultural realities may shift what those bodies look like. Using default body to establish a social hierarchy and distribute power and resources in a global phenomenon. The statistic above illustrate an irrefutable truth. Body shame and oppression are both symptoms and tools in a far more complex and sweeping system to access the resources. A system that impacts not only how we feel about ourselves but also our opportunities and ability to thrive in the world. There is a reason we hate our bodies, and it is not because of Curtis or our mamas or even our low self esteem. We are saddled with body shame because it is an age old system. Those roots and pockets are deep. Body shame flourishes in our world because profits and power depends on it. In Apologetic Inquiry number 16, how does body shame impact political power? How has body shame made you less powerful? Call it what it is, body terrorism. At the beginning of the book, I describe how the containers of self-esteem and self-confidence simply cannot hold the breadth and depth of radical self-love. As humans, we are in need of radical love to transform how our world deals with bodies. I hope this is the point of the book I've made in my case. Our work must be radical if we are to combat the consistent inundation of toxic media messages. Laws and regulations seep in body shame and body-based oppression into every aspect of our society. Inequality in our government system, manipulation in our media, no matter the structure under examination. Ultimately, each of us bears the personal, social, and political burden of a widespread and deeply troubling relationship with bodies. The results of this reality are nothing short of devastating. Gross inequality and disenfranchisement across social experiences, poor public health outcome, and unjust legislation are systemic representation of centuries of infusing body shame into every sector of public and private life. A National Center of Health statistic reports, as recounted in the New York Times, indicated that suicide rates in 2014 were the highest they had been in 30 years. American Indians, a community whose bodies have been met with the interminable history of oppression, erasure, and iniquity, saw the highest rise in rates, with a horrifying increase of 89%. A ProPublica analysis of federal data regarding police-involved shooting found that young black men between aged 15 to 19 were 21 times more likely to be killed by the young white police than young white men of same age. By the first half of 2017, The Human Rights Campaign has tracked the rise of over 115 pieces of new anti-LGBT legislation across the United States. These numbers tell a story about how our society far under the pressure of body-based oppression. Entire communities are dying from epidemic levels of suicide. Parents around the country are immobilized with the fear that a routine traffic stop might result in the indiscriminate murder of their child at the hands of police officers. This fear is a commonplace that thousands of black parents find themselves having the talk with their kids, a detailed discussion of what their child should do if the police stop them, in the hope that they might prepare them with enough information to arrive home safe each night. No sooner than gay and lesbian people celebrate landmark legislative win of being able of legally marrying the person they love, they are forced to watch states after states sanction their continued discrimination in restaurants, in medical facilities, and on the job. Our world is disconnected from the sight of these iniquities. We look at statistics and see policy of laws, forgetting how they are created by and enacted on our bodies. Across gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, race, size, age, and ability level, our system are consistently affirming or denouncing bodies, communicating to us what we should and should not consider valid about other people's body, while simultaneously detailing for us what we should and we should not accept from about our own. Radical reflection, our belief about bodies disproportionately impact those whose race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, and age deviate from our default notion. The further from the default, the greater the impact. We are all affected, but not equally. But not equally. On December 8th, 2014, 17 years old trans youth Layla Alcon intentionally stepped into a highway traffic and was hit by an 18-wheel truck. In her suicide note, Layla detailed her family's rejection of her trans identity and their refusal to give her permission to receive gender affirmation surgery. It is tempting to see Layla's story as the individual allegory of a highly religious family's dogma and its tragic impact on the teen. But to allow the analysis to stop there would be to miss the myriad ways to which systems much bigger than Layla's family failed to protect her. Layla's history indict our entire society for its unwillingness to care for all bodies, thus making it virtually impossible for some of us to live lives of radical self-love, or even to continue wanting to live it at all. A lack of school-based resource able to address the needs of trans students and accessible mental health support, a society that demands that bodies conform a rigid gender assignment. These larger systemic realities contribute as much as Layla's heart-rending death as her family's bigotries. A long line of people and systems blocked Layla's version of a rich and authentic future for herself. That obstruction ended her life in a political inquiry. If you could share something with Leila that would have given her hope, what would you say? What would you have said? Write it down, share it with yourself on the days that you are struggling to find hope. Living with the mounting evidence that society at every turn will reject our attempt to exist unapologetically in our bodies is to live in a state of terror, dragging ourselves through a lifetime of self-hate endorsed and encouraged by our media and our political and economic systems is a terrifying way to live, and yet millions of people exist in this constant state of fear every day. It is an act of terrorism against our bodies to perpetuate body shame, to support body based oppression. I call this body terrorism. Terrorism is defined as the systematic use of terror, especially as means of coercion. It takes no more than brief review of the historic and present day examples of media manipulation of and legislative oppression to acknowledge that we are indeed being seared into body shame for both economic and political reasons. When using the term body terrorism, I have been met with resistance and accused of hyperbole. You are being dismissive of the danger of real terrorism. Distractors have said this knee-jerk response to our understanding of terrorism is shaped by a public discourse that continues to separate the fear and violence we navigate every day in our bodies from the more overtly political violence we see happening around the world. We must not minimize and negate the impact of being told to hate or fear our bodies and the bodies of others. Living in a society structured to profit from our self-hate create a dynamic in which we are so terrified and being ourselves that we adopt terror-based ways to being in our bodies. All this is fueled by a system that makes a large quantity of money off our shame of bias. These experiences are not divergent but complementary. On the morning of the presidential inauguration of Donald Trump, I was leaving Washington, D.C. after hosting an event called the Peace Bowl the night before. When I arrived at the airport and proceeded through the body scanner, I was stopped for additional screening. Apparently, my groin area had signaled that machine's alert system, and I was going to be subjected to pat down. This was not my first time navigating the TSA screening procedure. I am, after all, a fat black woman with the word radical in her job title on her business card. The TSA agent rubbed her hands on my inner thing and, without warning, rubbed my vulva. My response was involuntary. "Why are you touching my vagina?" I blurted out loud enough that for the entire security line to hear. Confounded by my blurted out loud enough, confounded by my outburst, the TSA agent quickly called for her supervisor, who demanded that I be taken to a private screening room where I would be less disturbative as the agent grabbed my genitalia. Powerless, I wept silently as the agent completed the pat down. And then I exit, exited the private room, shaken by a deep sense of violation. I had been sexually assaulted simply in order to be able carry on to my next destination under the orders of government and paid for by my tax dollars. The next day, anxiety hijacked me as I walked into a different airport while headed home from my travels. Initially, I couldn't locate the source of the anxiety buzzing through my chest and legs. And then I recalled the event of the day before. I was having a trauma response. My body has catalogued yesterday's incidents as a traumatic violence and was bracing in terror for the experience to happen again. Later, I learned from severe transgender friends that the TSA scanners are designed to alert agents to anomaly in the groin area. Specifically, agents are instructed to additionally screen all people whose groins appear to differ from their perceived gender. Across the country, large numbers of transgender people are also being forced to navigate similar invasive sexual traumas simply to board a plane. We are told that the procedures of the Transportation Security Administration are supposed to make us safer. I did not feel safe. I was terrified and without recourse. While I stood in the private screening room with tears rolling down my face, the least of my concern was some random person living out a political vendetta against the United States during my flight. I was terrified of having my genitalia touched without my consent by a stranger as a requisite for passage to my next destination. This is body terrorism, believing that it is preferable to walk into the path of 18-wheeler than to live another day being rejected by the whole of society is a belief rooted firmly the soil of being subjected of body to body terrorism. An apologetic inquiry number 18. Can you recall an incident when you felt a sense of terror about being in your body? What did you do to navigate the feeling? The historical and contemporary violence associated with body hatred is widespread and horrific. We cannot continue to normalize this action as simply inconvenient and unfortunate. The outcomes of body terrorism are deadly, from violence against the people of color, lynching, slavery, and Holocaust, internment camps, to LGBTQLA, bodies being regularly assaulted, murdered, and driving to suicide, to rape and sexual assault, to the bombing and abortion, clinical and more the murder of physicians based on women's right to autonomy over their own bodies, to the involuntary sterilization to people with disabilities, to debilitating shame that people around the world live with as a result of the psychological attacks and social and media machine works against us, ending in bulimia, anorexia, addiction, stigma, racism, homophobia, ableism, sexism, ageism, transphobia, mass self-hatred, and senseless violence. It is clear that there is nothing rhetorical and hyperbolic about details the impact of body hatred. They calling the promotion of such hatred on any scale an act of body-based terrorism. The framework of radical self-love seeks to engage people in process of individual transformation, but as importantly, it seeks to dismantle the structural and systemic emotional, psychological, and physical violence meted out against different bodies all over the planet. It serves those who profit from our life of our self-hatred to minimize its impact and disconnect it from the larger social framework of violence and intimidation that allows oppression and injustice to thrive. Discrimination, social inequality, and injustice are manifestations of our inability to make peace with with the body, our own and others. By making these connections, we build the foundation to foster a world radical in apologetic self-love, which translate the radical human's actions in the service of a more just a compassionate world. Radical reflection. Take a moment to consider how body terrorism has impacted your life and the lives of people you love. Imagine what might be possible in a world without it.